It started on a night that looked like every other in his quiet routine, the kind of night that would normally pass without leaving a trace in memory, but in hindsight carried the weight of something that had been waiting for years to resurface. The highway was almost empty, the sky was drowned in a wet fog that clung to the asphalt, and the gentle noise of rain hitting the windshield created the same calm rhythm he had grown used to during his night drives. Daniel Carmichael had been working late deliveries along the Oregon coast for almost 3 years without anything unusual ever happening. Not a flat tire, not a strange passenger, not even a close call on the road. But that illusion of safety shattered the moment he noticed the car appear behind him at mile marker 12. It was a dark sedan, an older model, maybe early 2000s, with headlights that seemed too dim for the distance it kept, yet bright enough to outline a silhouette of menace in the rearview mirror. At first, he didn't think much of it. After all, everyone shares the road with strangers. But there was something unusual, something subtle yet persistent. The sedan matched his speed perfectly, neither closing the distance nor falling behind, holding a presence so steady that it began to feel intentional. He told himself not to be dramatic. People drive at similar speeds all the time, but then the rain intensified, and when Daniel naturally slowed down a little, the car slowed too. Precisely, instantly, unnervingly. The sensation that he was no longer alone settled into his chest, a quiet pressure that made his fingers tighten around the steering wheel. The road stretched forward in long, dark ribbons illuminated only by his headlights, and behind him, that shape, that car, refused to change its position by even a meter. The rational part of his mind worked overtime to explain it. Maybe the driver was tired and using his taillights as a guide. Maybe the person was nervous driving at night. Maybe it was coincidence. But coincidences fade, and this didn't fade. If anything, it grew heavier. At mile 15, he changed lanes. The sedan followed. At mile 17, he accelerated, pulling to 70, then 75, then 78 mph, faster than he liked to go on wet pavement. Yet the car behind him sped up too, maintaining the exact same gap. A cold awareness crawled into his stomach as he checked the mirror again and again, and every time he expected to see something different, but no. The same dark outline, the same unwavering distance, the same eerie synchronization. Daniel didn't know it yet, but this night wasn't random, and the driver behind him wasn't a stranger pulled from the endless sea of anonymous travelers on the road. The truth, buried deep in a part of his past he tried never to revisit, had finally caught up to him in the form of 2 dim headlights cutting through the fog. The highway around him was silent, except for the rain and the hum of tires slicing wet asphalt. And the longer he looked at that car, the more he felt a kind of recognition. Not of the vehicle itself, but of the feeling it carried, like a ghost of a memory reaching through his ribs and squeezing his lungs. This wasn't just someone following him. This was someone who knew exactly who he was. And before the night was over, Daniel would come to understand that the road ahead wasn't taking him to his next delivery. It was taking him back to the one moment he had spent years trying to forget, the moment someone else had never forgiven. Daniel tried to shake off the unease building in his chest, telling himself he was imagining patterns where none existed. But deep down, he already knew something was wrong, and the longer the car stayed behind him with that perfect, unnatural consistency, the harder it became to pretend otherwise. The fog had thickened to the point where the world outside the moving beam of his headlights looked like a shapeless wall of gray, and every mile swallowed by the road ahead only made the silence inside his car feel heavier, almost suffocating. He reached forward and turned the radio on just to break the tension, but the static-filled voice of a late-night talk show didn't help. It only made him more aware of how alone he was out here, how isolated this stretch of the Oregon highway remained after dark. When he glanced at the mirror again, the sedan was still there, same distance, same rhythm, like a shadow glued to his bumper, refusing to be shaken. a hint of anger mixed with the fear rising in his stomach, because if this was just a distracted driver, why didn't they ever pass? Why maintain that exact distance for so long? He decided to test it again, breathing out slowly as he flicked on his turn signal and slid into the rightmost lane, giving the sedan plenty of room to move ahead. For a moment, Daniel thought maybe this nightmare would unravel into an embarrassing misunderstanding, that the driver would simply overtake him and vanish into the fog like any normal person. But the sedan didn't pass. It changed lanes too, matching his move with an eerie precision that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. He tightened his grip on the wheel and felt a cold wave crawl down his spine, the kind of instinctive fear that doesn't care about logic or excuses. It only cares about survival. To break the pattern, Daniel braked gently, allowing his speed to drop just enough that the other car should have closed the gap. Instead, the sedan slowed down again, perfectly mirroring every inch of his change in speed. It was no longer possible to deny what was happening. Someone was following him on purpose. Someone who didn't want to pass, didn't want to leave, didn't want to reveal themselves, at least not yet. His heart pounded harder with each passing second, and he caught himself scanning the dark road ahead for any sign of life, a gas station, an exit ramp, another car, anything. But there was nothing, just endless trees pressing against the fog and the winding threads of asphalt leading deeper into the night. He considered calling someone, but the signal on this stretch was notoriously unreliable, and even if it worked, what would he say? "There's a car following me." People would tell him to pull over at a well-lit place or head to the nearest town, but out here, well-lit places simply didn't exist. He couldn't shake the feeling that stopping anywhere on this stretch would be the worst mistake he could make. With a dry mouth and tight jaw, Daniel pushed his truck a little faster, trying to put some distance between him and the car that refused to let him breathe. But no matter what he did, the sedan responded instantly. It never felt rushed or reckless. It followed him with a patience that was far more terrifying than aggression. It was the calm of someone who already knew how the night would end. Daniel swallowed hard, fighting the tightening knot in his stomach, and tried to focus on the road ahead, but his mind kept drifting back to a memory he thought he had buried. A night years ago, on a road not so different from this one, when he had made a choice he never spoke about again. The memory flickered like a weak flame in the corner of his mind, and for a second he wondered if this was connected somehow, if the past really could return in this form, driving a car with dim headlights and perfect control. He tried to push the thought away. He needed to stay focused, but the sedan behind him stayed perfectly in place, refusing to give him even a second of relief. And deep inside, a terrible suspicion began to grow, one he wasn't ready to face yet. What if the person in that car knew exactly who he was and what he had done? Daniel tried to focus on the endless ribbon of highway stretching in front of him, but the steady glow of the headlights in his rearview mirror kept dragging his thoughts backward, toward a memory he had spent years forcing into a locked corner of his mind. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was recognition. Not of the car itself, but of the feeling tightening around him like a cold fist. The human mind has a way of warning us long before we consciously understand the reason, and Daniel felt that instinct rising in him now, whispering that this night wasn't the beginning of something terrifying, but the continuation of something he had tried desperately to forget. The rain softened into a misty drizzle as he passed mile marker 19, and for a brief moment he allowed himself to breathe, hoping the change in weather might bring a sense of clarity, or at least a small break in tension. But the sedan remained exactly where it had been, never drifting, never lagging, never inching closer. A silent predator waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. He tried to analyze the situation rationally, listing possibilities in his mind. Maybe the driver was drunk, maybe they were afraid of passing in fog, maybe they had nowhere else to go. But each explanation collapsed under the weight of how intentional the car's movements felt. This wasn't hesitation. It was strategy, patience, a deliberate choice to stay behind him no matter what he did. Daniel exhaled shakily and wiped a hand across his face, trying to steady himself as the fog pressed harder against the glass. The road began to curve gently to the left, following the shape of the coastline, and as the truck leaned with the turn, Daniel remembered a night years ago when he had taken a much sharper curve much too fast. He had been younger then, reckless, exhausted after a double shift, and convinced he could make it home without stopping for rest. But fatigue is a brutal enemy, and he had blinked longer than a blink should ever last on a road like that, and when his eyes snapped open again, he had seen headlights, bright, panicked, swerving, and the sickening sound of metal scraping metal before the world jolted sideways. The memory rushed at him like a wave, and he tightened his grip on the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. He didn't want to think about that night. He didn't want to remember the way his chest had burned with terror, the way he had sat there shaking while the other car rolled to a stop on the shoulder, the way he had heard someone shouting, coughing, maybe crying. He had never been sure because he didn't stay long enough to find out. He had panicked. He had fled. It was the worst decision he had ever made, one he regretted every single day after, but the police never contacted him, and no reports ever surfaced that matched what he remembered. Over time, he convinced himself that maybe the other driver hadn't been badly hurt. Maybe they didn't catch his plate. Maybe it hadn't been as serious as it felt. Maybe he had imagined parts of it. Human beings are good at building walls around guilt when no one forces them to tear them down. But tonight, on this fog-soaked highway with a car glued to his tail for nearly 20 miles, Daniel felt those walls beginning to crack. He forced himself to breathe slowly as he approached a bend in the road, hoping that the small stretch of downhill ahead might offer a chance to create distance. He pressed the gas gently, pushing the truck toward 80 again, feeling the engine protest as the wheels sliced through the wet pavement. But no matter how fast he went, the sedan behind him went just as fast. No more, no less, maintaining that same haunting distance like an extension of his shadow. The fear inside him sharpened, and pieces of the past he had buried began to rise with it. The screeching tires, the flashing lights of the other car, the feeling of someone staring at him through cracked glass as he sped away. For the first time in years, he let himself ask the question he had never dared to voice. What if they survived? And what if they never forgot? The thought struck him so hard he felt sick. He swallowed, tasted bitterness, and gripped the wheel tighter as his pulse hammered in his throat. Behind him, the sedan kept following, steady, patient, relentless. And Daniel realized something that chilled him deeper than the fog. Whoever was behind the wheel wasn't trying to catch him. They were trying to corner him, not with speed, not with aggression, but with time. They were waiting for the exact moment when he would have no choice but to face them, just like he should have faced them years ago. Daniel's pulse thudded painfully in his ears as the miles kept ticking forward, each one stretching tighter around his nerves like a rope being pulled inch by inch. He had hoped the next town would appear soon, the soft glow of distant streetlights cutting through the fog. But the Oregon coast had long, merciless stretches where civilization simply disappeared after dark. And he had committed to this particular delivery route, thinking it was always quiet, always predictable, never dangerous. Now the stillness of the highway felt hostile, like the world had narrowed down to two vehicles suspended in a suffocating bubble of wet darkness, his truck in front and the patient shadow behind him. The fog thickened again as the road dipped into a shallow valley lined with towering evergreens, their silhouettes fading into the gloom like walls closing in. Daniel instinctively checked his phone for signal, even though he knew there wouldn't be any through this section. And when he saw the familiar "no service" at the top of the screen, his stomach twisted. He considered turning on the interior lights to calm himself, but the idea of making himself more visible felt wrong, like exposing his throat to a predator. He kept both hands locked on the wheel instead, trying to control his breathing, forcing himself to think clearly. At mile marker 22, A small green reflective sign flashed by, reminding him that the next rest stop wasn't for another 18 miles. 18 miles felt like another eternity with that sedan glued to him. The truck's headlights carved narrow tunnels through the fog, and Daniel realized just how alone he was when a deer darted across the road ahead, forcing him to brake hard. His heart lurched as the truck skidded for a split second on the slick pavement, but he kept it steady, watching the deer vanish into the darkness. When he glanced at the rearview mirror, expecting the sedan to have been thrown off by his sudden stop, his breath hitched. The car had slowed at exactly the same moment, keeping the same damn distance, perfect as ever. It was as if the other driver had anticipated the deer too. That possibility, that awareness, sank cold and heavy in his stomach. Daniel's mind raced as he passed mile 23, searching desperately for any scrap of logic that might calm him. Maybe they were terrified of hitting wildlife. Maybe they were following him because his taillights gave them comfort. Maybe they were just another person stuck on this godforsaken road. But deep down, instinct screamed that none of those things fit. People didn't react with that kind of precision unless they were focused, intensely focused. He wiped his sweaty palms against his jeans and tried to recall every detail of the car behind him. The dim headlights, the old model, the shape of the grille he had briefly glimpsed in the fog, the fact that the driver had never once flashed their lights or changed position. There was no curiosity, no hesitation, no human randomness in their behavior. It was deliberate, almost methodical. When the road straightened again, Daniel took a chance and flicked on his hazard lights for 3 seconds, a universal signal for "go around me." He slowed slightly, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the driver would interpret it as permission to pass. But the sedan did nothing. Its lights remained still, unwavering, ignoring the signal entirely. Something inside Daniel cracked a little at that, a thin sliver of fear slipping into panic. He felt the urge to pull over just to get away from the suffocating pressure of being followed, but every instinct in his body told him that stopping was exactly what the other driver wanted. Not passing him, not approaching him, just waiting for him to make the wrong move. At mile marker 25, the highway hit one of its loneliest stretches, a long, open curve with nothing but forest on both sides and a steep drop on the right shoulder. The fog here seemed to pulse, thinning and thickening as if breathing. Daniel's thoughts drifted again to that night years ago. The accident he had convinced himself was too old, too buried for consequences to ever claw their way back to him. But tonight, the sensation of being singled out, hunted with a quiet rage, made that illusion crumble. He tried to shake the memory off, but images leaked through. Shattered glass, spinning headlights, a voice calling out in pain before fading into chaos. Worst of all, he remembered the look in the cracked side mirror as he sped away, a face barely illuminated, but full of disbelief and hurt. He had pushed that memory so deep for so long that even now it felt unreal, like something he had dreamed. But the sedan behind him said otherwise. The past had shape, the past had a steering wheel, and the past was following him through the fog with unwavering patience. Daniel swallowed hard, eyes stinging, and focused on the road ahead. If this driver was connected to that night, if they had waited years for this moment, then they were not going to give up, and neither could he. The miles stretched out in front of him like a sentence he couldn't escape, and with every passing second, the reality settled deeper into his bones. He was trapped on this highway with someone who knew him better than he knew himself. Daniel pushed deeper into the highway, his shoulders tense and locked, as if any wrong breath might tip the balance of the night. The fog seemed thicker now, clinging to the road in long streaks that made his headlights flicker against the white veil, and for a moment he wondered if the sedan behind him could even see him clearly. But the consistency of its distance told him the driver saw everything. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, half hoping the car would disappear into the haze, but it never did. The dim headlights remained right where they had been for more than 20 miles, as steady as a heartbeat. The steady hum of the engine, normally a comforting rhythm, now sounded like a countdown. He could feel the tension building in his muscles, a twisting pressure that made his ribs feel tight, and the quiet inside the cabin magnified every small sound. His breath, the faint rattle of something in the glove compartment, the squeak of the wipers dragging across a windshield that would never quite dry. When he passed mile marker 27, he realized with a sinking feeling that the highway was entering one of its most isolated stretches, a long corridor with no exit ramps and no side roads until the next county line. He had driven this route enough to know that the next opportunity to leave the main road wouldn't come until mile 34, 7 more miles of being trapped in a straight, unavoidable path. The sedan behind him seemed to know that too, because the driver made no attempt to close the distance or accelerate. They simply continued following with that same eerie precision, like a puppeteer letting the string slacken just enough, confident the puppet wasn't going anywhere. Daniel's breath tightened as he realized he had stopped noticing the rain altogether. His focus had narrowed so intensely that he no longer registered the cold outside or the wet sound of the tires on the asphalt. His reality had shrunk into 2 points of light behind him and the endless stretch of road ahead. He forced himself to think of anything that might help. A patrol station, a trucker he could flag down, even a passing car. But nothing appeared. The world felt abandoned, wrapped in a silence so complete it seemed unnatural, though he knew it was just the nature of the coast at this hour. A thought crept in, one he had avoided until now. Maybe he should pull into the next turnout and force the situation to resolve. Maybe confronting whoever was behind him was better than letting this slow suffocation continue. But as soon as the idea surfaced, his instincts recoiled violently. Everything about the sedan's behavior screamed that confrontation was exactly what they were waiting for. A moment when he was off the highway, alone, vulnerable, with no witnesses. This wasn't the kind of tailing that ended with a conversation. This was the kind of tailing that ended with something final. Another mile slipped by, then another. The fog seemed to pulse with each turn of the wheels, thickening when he inhaled, thinning when he exhaled, as if the night itself responded to his fear. At mile 28, the road dipped again, and he saw the faint glow of water beside the shoulder, the lip of a reservoir that dropped down in a steep slope. He thought briefly of braking suddenly, forcing the sedan to pass or crash or reveal some piece of intention, but the idea felt reckless and stupid. If the other driver wanted him dead, crashing into him would be the simplest method. But they didn't. They wanted him alive, for now. Daniel adjusted his grip on the wheel and tried to steady his breathing. His thoughts drifted again to the accident he had buried under layers of denial. He remembered the fear in the moment right after the impact, the world spinning, headlights twisting in impossible angles, and then the terrible silence afterward. He remembered stepping out of his car, heart pounding, legs trembling, tasting blood on his lips. He remembered seeing the other vehicle crushed against the guardrail, steam rising from the hood, and he remembered the shape of someone inside, slumped forward but moving, barely. He had taken a half step toward them before panic clenched around his throat like a fist, telling him he would go to jail, that no one would believe it hadn't been intentional, that his life would be destroyed. So he fled. He left them there, and he had never known what became of them. Tonight, with the sedan mirroring his every move, he felt the weight of that decision settle over him like a lead blanket. He didn't know who was behind that wheel, but every instinct screamed that they knew exactly who he was. As he passed mile 29, the fog thinned slightly, and he saw the shadow of a sign ahead. No stops next 4 miles. His heart dropped. The highway wasn't just isolating him, it was funneling him towards something. He swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the glowing letters as they blurred past his windshield. Behind him, the sedan kept following, never wavering, as if it had been waiting years for this exact stretch of road. And Daniel realized with a surge of cold dread that the night wasn't happening to him by chance. It was happening to him, specifically him, and the road ahead was beginning to feel less like a highway and more like a closing cage. Daniel felt the road tightening around him like a noose, each mile shrinking the space where he could pretend this was anything other than deliberate. The truck's engine hummed steadily beneath him, a familiar sound he usually found comforting during long night drives. But tonight it seemed distant, drowned out by the relentless thudding of his heartbeat. The rain had eased into a fine mist that hovered close to the asphalt, blurring everything beyond the reach of his headlights, and the faint smell of wet pine seeped through the air vents as the dense forest pressed in from both sides. He passed mile marker 30, and the fog parted just enough to reveal the faint reflection of water through the trees, the wide, dark surface of a coastal inlet hugging the curve of the highway. He used to find this stretch of road calming, almost scenic even at night, but now it felt like a place where someone could vanish without leaving a trace. A single misstep, a forced swerve, and the world would never know what happened. He tried again to calm himself with logic. Maybe the driver was lost. Maybe their GPS had malfunctioned. Maybe they were frightened, inexperienced at night driving, and using his taillights as a guide. But logic wilted under the weight of something far heavier, something instinctual. No one followed another car with such precision for 30 miles unless they wanted something. And whatever they wanted, they were willing to wait for the perfect moment to take it. Daniel's mind drifted once more to the memory clawing its way out of the dark corners of his past. The accident had been brutal, metal twisting, tires screaming, headlights exploding in a shower of sparks. But his fear afterward had been worse. He had been 24, scared out of his mind, convinced that staying would mean handcuffs, trials, losing everything he had barely begun to build. He had told himself that leaving wasn't the same as abandoning someone. He had told himself that they would get help from someone else, that it hadn't been his responsibility, that maybe they would be okay. But guilt had a way of burrowing into the bones, settling deep and waiting. He clenched his jaw and forced himself back to the present, trying to stay focused as the highway narrowed slightly, with a metal guardrail hugging the right side and a steep drop just beyond. This stretch was notorious for accidents: slick pavement, tight curves, no shoulder to pull onto. If the sedan behind him wanted to force a confrontation, this was the perfect spot. He kept his speed steady at 68, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly they ached, and he checked the mirror again. The sedan remained exactly in place, the dim headlights glowing like two quiet threats in the fog. The sheer patience of the driver unnerved him more than aggression ever could. Someone angry might tailgate, swerve, flash their lights. Someone patient wanted something deeper, something personal. He swallowed hard, mouth dry, and reached for the dashboard camera mounted just under the mirror. It had been recording since he left his last stop, company policy, so if anything happened tonight, there would be footage. For a brief second, the existence of the camera gave him a tiny flicker of comfort. But just as the thought crossed his mind, the dashcam's small green indicator light blinked twice and went dark. Daniel froze. That had never happened before. The device had never malfunctioned, not once in 3 years. He tapped it lightly. Nothing. No light, no click, no reset. It was dead. His breath hitched, and the tiny spark of comfort evaporated into raw fear. Had something interfered with it? Was it just a coincidence? Or had the driver behind him done something he didn't understand, to ensure there would be no recording of what was coming next? The idea shook him so badly, he almost slowed down again, but instinct screamed not to. Not here, not on a stretch of road with no witnesses, no exits, and a cliff just feet away. His thoughts spiraled, each one darker than the last, but one kept rising above the others, like a voice breaking through static. They're not chasing you, they're guiding you. He blinked hard, trying to shake the idea off, but it stuck. Whoever was behind him wasn't trying to scare him into crashing. They weren't trying to intimidate him with reckless driving or sudden moves. They were herding him, slowly, deliberately, toward a place where they wanted the final confrontation to happen. The realization sent a cold shiver through his chest, and for a moment he considered slamming on the brakes despite his fear. Maybe forcing a confrontation here right now was better than letting the night continue tightening around him. But another mile marker loomed through the fog, 31, and Daniel's breath caught in his throat as the shape of the next stretch of road came into view. It was one of the most isolated sections of the entire highway, a long descending curve that wrapped around a rocky hillside, with dense forest on the left and a steep drop to cold black water on the right. No shoulder, no pullouts, no escape. Behind him, the sedan remained perfectly calm, like a predator that had spent hours stalking its prey and now saw the end drawing near. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized that whatever waited at the end of this curve was something he wouldn't be able to outrun, no matter how fast he drove. Daniel eased his foot off the accelerator as the long descending curve tightened around him, forcing the truck into a slower, steadier pace. The fog clung low to the ground, swirling in faint spirals around the tires, and every tree lining the road looked more like a dark figure watching him pass, their shapes sharpened by the misty glow of the headlights. His breathing had become shallow without him realizing it, each inhale catching in his throat as though the air itself resisted entering his lungs. Behind him, the sedan followed with the same chilling calm, never drifting an inch closer, never backing off, its dim headlights cutting through the fog like the eyes of something ancient and patient. The guardrail beside him creaked lightly as the wind pushed against it, the sound barely audible but somehow magnified inside Daniel's already fraying nerves. As he came out of the curve, the highway offered a brief stretch of straight pavement before bending again, and he knew he was approaching a part of the route he always disliked. The coastal deviation, a mandatory detour created months earlier after heavy rains had damaged a bridge on the main line. The normal route continued straight, but the damaged bridge forced all drivers to take an alternate road, a narrow, two-lane detour that twisted inland for several miles before reconnecting with the highway. During the day, it wasn't terrible, but at night, with fog covering everything, it felt like a tunnel carved through isolation itself. And tonight, with someone following him so perfectly, the detour felt like a trap closing. He saw the reflective orange signs ahead emerging through the fog. Bridge closed ahead, use detour, followed by mandatory turn, 1 mile. His heart sank. There was no avoiding it. The highway was funneling him directly into a quieter, darker, more enclosed path, where he had zero visibility and zero chance of being seen by anyone. A memory flashed through his mind. The news broadcast from months ago when the bridge failed, a small segment showing the washed-out section dangling over the river, followed by footage of workers installing signs and barriers to redirect traffic. He remembered thinking then that he would avoid this route at night whenever possible. Yet here he was, with no choice left. As the truck approached mile marker 32, Daniel slowed slightly, not enough to draw suspicion, but enough to prepare for the coming turn. The detour entrance loomed ahead, a wide curve branching off to the right, marked by blinking orange lights that pulsed rhythmically, casting eerie glows through the fog. His hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles pale, and he found himself staring at the turn as if hoping it might disappear. It didn't. Behind him, the sedan remained steady, almost serene, its lights barely flickering despite the thick mist. If the driver behind him knew the detour was coming, and Daniel had the sickening feeling they did, then this entire 32-mile pursuit might have been orchestrated to push him exactly here, a place where the main road would end, where traffic thinned to nothing, where the forest swallowed sound, where no one would interrupt whatever was supposed to happen. As he approached the turn, Daniel's pulse skyrocketed. He flicked on his turn signal out of reflex, the soft, steady clicking echoing loudly in the cabin. And then something happened that nearly made his heart stop. The sedan behind him turned on its signal too. Not late, not early, at the exact same second. Perfect synchronization, perfect intention, perfect confirmation. This was no coincidence. This was targeted, guided, directed. Daniel swallowed hard, his whole body trembling as he guided the truck into the detour lane, the pavement narrowing immediately as the road curved between dense walls of forest. The fog seemed even thicker here, as if the trees themselves exhaled it. He could barely see more than 20 feet ahead. The entrance to the detour cut off the rest of the world completely, wrapping him in a suffocating tunnel of darkness and mist. The sedan followed him in without hesitation. No pause, no slow drift, no reconsideration. It stayed right behind him, as if tethered to the truck by an invisible rope. The last faint glimpse of the main highway vanished behind them, swallowed by fog and distance. For the first time since noticing the sedan, Daniel felt the full weight of isolation settle over him like a physical force. The detour road was narrower, lined on both sides by thick, towering firs that blocked any faint moonlight. The fog trapped the headlights in tight cones that barely illuminated the pavement ahead. There were no houses along this stretch, no emergency phones, no cameras, no traffic pullouts, nothing but a single lane leading deeper into the unknown. Daniel felt his breath turning shallow again. His fingers trembled against the steering wheel. He knew, unmistakably, that this was exactly where the driver behind him wanted him. And as the forest swallowed both vehicles, sealing them off from the rest of the world, he finally accepted a truth he had been resisting for 30 miles. This wasn't a chase. It was a reckoning. The detour road swallowed Daniel with a finality that made his skin prickle. The forest closing in on both sides like massive, silent sentinels, witnessing a moment they had seen before. The headlights carved narrow tunnels through the fog, illuminating only a sliver of the path ahead, while the rest dissolved into a grey, shifting void that made every turn feel sharper than it was. Daniel kept his speed around 40, afraid that going any faster might send him skidding into the trees, but going slower felt even more dangerous. The sedan behind him remained exactly 2 car lengths back, the dim glow of its headlights steady, unwavering, like a predator padding silently through the undergrowth, never losing sight of its prey. The detour twisted sharply to the left, then dipped slightly before rising again, and with every turn, Daniel felt the suffocating pressure of being guided further into isolation. His phone remained dead. His dashcam remained dead. His hope remained flickering somewhere in the back of his mind, barely holding on. The forest pressed closer, branches arching overhead like claws, and the fog grew so dense in certain stretches that Daniel found himself leaning forward as if his body could somehow push the visibility farther. He could hear his own breathing, shallow and irregular, and the faint rattle of something loose in the passenger door that normally wouldn't bother him now felt like a warning. Every nerve in his body screamed danger. At mile marker 2 of the detour, a small reflective tag hammered into a post on the right side. Daniel's chest tightened as he remembered something he had seen on the news months ago. A story about how emergency services hated this detour because there were no cameras and no cell coverage anywhere along its 9-mile stretch. A perfect blind spot. A place where accidents happened and investigators struggled to determine the details. A place where someone could disappear without immediate explanation. The memory sent a shiver through him, and as he checked the mirror again, the sedan's headlights cut straight through his fear, grounding him back into the moment. Whoever was behind him had chosen this route for a reason. He could feel that truth like a weight pressing into his ribs. At the 3rd mile marker, his truck hit a small pothole that jostled the cabin and made his heart leap into his throat. The sedan reacted instantly, dipping slightly at the same spot, absorbing the bump with a smoothness that made Daniel's stomach twist. This wasn't a reckless driver. This wasn't someone inexperienced. This was someone who knew how to handle the road, how to maintain control, how to remain calm while the fear in Daniel ballooned into desperation. His thoughts turned again to the accident he had tried so hard to bury. The memory surfaced in sharper detail now, clear enough to sting. The face in the shattered mirror, The bleeding arm hanging out of the crushed window, the faint, pained voice calling out into the night, his own panicked breathing as he backed away from the scene. The decision he made, the one he regretted every single day since. As he drove deeper into the detour, the possibility that the person behind him could be connected to that night no longer felt abstract. It felt certain. I left them there, he thought, a cold tremor running through his hands. I left them alone. I left them hurt. I left them in the dark. The fog thickened again until the world outside became a swirling blur, and the narrow lane felt like driving through a tunnel with the walls closing in. Daniel blinked rapidly, trying to clear the moisture from his eyelashes, and forced himself to inhale slowly, then exhale. The sedan behind him followed like a phantom. No weaving, no impatience, no sign of retreat. When the road curved again, this time to the right, Daniel noticed a dim flicker of movement at the edge of his vision, the reflection of something metallic on the forest floor. At first, he dismissed it as trash or debris washed down by the rain. But then another flash appeared a few seconds later, then another, and as his headlights passed the 4th-mile marker, Daniel suddenly understood what he was seeing. Car parts. Not fresh ones. Old, rusted pieces of fenders, twisted scraps of bumpers, fragments of headlights shattered long ago. The forest hid them well in daylight, but at night, the reflective strips still clung to the metal in places where the paint had peeled away. This detour, this narrow, twisting road, had claimed many vehicles before, and the idea that someone had chosen it for him made his breath falter. Behind him, the sedan continued silently, calmly, as if driving through a graveyard it already knew. Daniel swallowed hard and wiped his palms against his jeans again. His entire body felt tense, shaky, like he was driving towards something he could no longer avoid. The detour was leading him somewhere, and every instinct warned that the place he was being led to was not the end of the road, but the end of running. The forest closed further around him. The fog thickened. The sedan stayed steady, and Daniel realized with a painful clarity that whatever waited at the end of this detour was not a surprise to the person behind him. It was a destination. The detour stretched on in a suffocating silence, broken only by the steady rhythm of Daniel's tires slicing through damp pavement and the soft whisper of fog brushing against the truck's exterior. The narrow road dipped once more, and the headlights illuminated a brief patch of gravel where fallen leaves clung to puddles like drowned insects. Daniel leaned forward instinctively, scanning for any sign that the road might widen, that a turnout might appear, that some break in the monotony might give him an escape route, but the forest remained dense and the asphalt remained claustrophobic. His nerves felt like exposed wires, each tiny shift of the truck or flicker of light causing a new jolt of adrenaline. He kept glancing at the rearview mirror, hoping, foolishly, desperately, that the sedan might finally vanish into the fog. Instead, it remained perfectly framed between the edges of the mirror, its headlights unwavering, its silhouette calm and composed, as if the driver felt no stress at all. The contrast made Daniel's stomach twist. He was unraveling, but the person behind him was not. 2 miles deeper into the detour, he noticed something that made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. The sedan's headlights blinked once. Not in a flash, not a long flare, just a brief, controlled dip, as if the driver had intentionally flicked the high beams for half a second. Daniel's breath hitched. It wasn't bright enough to blind him, not quick enough to signal danger, but it was deliberate. A message. But a message for what? He tightened his grip on the wheel and forced himself to stay calm, but his pulse was hammering in his throat. Another 50 yards passed, and the sedan blinked again, the same controlled dip of the lights. Daniel's mind raced. Was it a warning, a threat, a cue, or was it simply the driver's way of saying, "I'm still here, and I'm in control"? A trembling breath escaped him before he realized he'd been holding it. He scanned the road ahead for anything unusual, anything that might have prompted the signal, but the mist revealed only more twisting pavement, more trees, more shadows. Nothing else. just the two vehicles suspended in this silent corridor of isolation. When the road curved left again, hugging a rocky embankment that jutted so close to the pavement it forced Daniel to edge slightly toward the center line, he checked the mirror again. The sedan had drifted slightly too, not dangerously close, but enough that its movement perfectly matched his. There was no interruption in its path, no braking, no hesitation. Whoever was driving knew the road, knew how to maneuver, and knew how to maintain just enough distance to avoid appearing aggressive while still exerting total control. Daniel's mind drifted again to the accident from years ago, feeling the memory creeping in like a slow poison. He tried to shove it away. This wasn't the time. He needed to stay focused, but the flashes in the mirror kept tugging at him, pulling him backwards through time, because in that memory, that dark, broken moment, there had also been lights blinking, not headlights, but hazard lights, flickering weakly on a damaged car, as if begging for help. And he had driven away from that blinking, leaving someone behind. The realization struck him like cold water. Was this the same car? No. The car in the accident had been lighter in color, maybe silver or blue. He couldn't remember in the chaos. But people could change cars. People could rebuild. People could follow. Daniel's breathing grew uneven as he reached the halfway point of the detour, passing a small wooden sign that barely caught the edge of his headlights. It read, 5 miles to highway, 5 miles left, before the detour reconnected with the main road. 5 miles before he reached a stretch that might have other drivers, faint cell service, a chance to escape this claustrophobic nightmare. But the thought didn't comfort him. If anything, it terrified him more, because something deep inside whispered that the other driver had no intention of letting him make it 5 more miles. The sedan's headlights blinked a third time, slower this time, more intentional, like punctuation on a sentence Daniel couldn't decipher. His throat tightened. He pressed the accelerator slightly, bringing the truck toward 50. The sedan matched it perfectly. He slowed down to 45. The sedan mirrored that too. The message became unmistakable. Speed doesn't matter. You don't decide the pace. I do. Panic flared inside him, sharp and immediate, and for a moment he felt the dangerous urge to slam the brakes, force the sedan to react, cause something to break the unbearable tension. But instinct screamed against it. Not here. Not on a narrow detour where the ground fell away just inches beyond the guardrail. Not when the other driver clearly knew how to stay in control. He swallowed hard, vision blurring for a second, as the fog reflected the glare of his own headlights back at him. He blinked it away and forced himself to breathe. But then, as he reached the next curve, something happened that sent a cold electric jolt through his spine. A shape appeared on the right side of the road. A dark, metallic shape, half hidden in the trees. A car. Not a fresh wreck. An old one, rusted, covered in moss, with shattered windows and a collapsed roof. A forgotten accident. A reminder. As his headlights washed over it, he saw something slashed into the metal near the driver's door. Letters, barely readable. But he recognized them instantly. A name. His last name. Carmichael. He sucked in a breath so sharp it hurt. Behind him, the sedan blinked its headlights a fourth time. Long, slow, unmistakable. A signal, a message, a promise. And Daniel finally understood with brutal clarity, this driver didn't just know him. This driver had been preparing for him. Daniel's entire body went cold as his truck rolled past the rusted wreck, half swallowed by the forest, the metallic carcass lingering in his peripheral vision like a ghost he had thought he'd buried. The name carved into the door felt like a punch to the chest, not a scratch from an accident, not a vandal's mark, but deliberate, carved with intention, carved by someone who knew exactly who would eventually see it. His breath caught as he realized it wasn't just a coincidence or a warning. It was a message, a marker, a signpost planted years after that night to ensure that if he ever returned to this stretch of road, or was brought here, he would understand he wasn't imagining things. Someone had kept track of him. Someone had been waiting. The fog pulsed in and out around the truck as if the forest were breathing, and the narrow road twisted ahead in a cruel, winding pattern that made it feel like he was descending deeper into some private hell. The pounding of his heart grew louder, almost drowning out the hum of the engine. He forced himself to breathe, gripping the wheel until his fingers ached. Behind him, the sedan followed with eerie calm, its headlights steady and intentional, as if the driver had no urgency because they already knew how this night would end. Daniel tried to swallow, but his throat was bone dry. His mind raced back to the accident, replaying it with a clarity that stabbed at his chest. He remembered the rain that night, heavier than tonight. He remembered losing control for a moment on a curve. He remembered the sickening impact, metal meeting metal, and the other car spinning toward the shoulder. But what he remembered most, what still woke him up some nights, was the sound, the voice. Not screaming. That would have made it easier to leave. No, it was something smaller, weaker, barely audible but unmistakably human. A broken whisper of pain, a person calling for help, and he had run. His legs had moved before his conscience could stop them. He left them there, alone in the dark, bleeding and begging for someone to stay. He had lived with that guilt, buried deep and silent, telling himself he would fix it someday, confess someday, explain someday. But years had passed, and someday never came. Now, watching the sedan behind him with its silent, unwavering presence, he finally understood the terrible truth. The person he left behind did not die. They lived, they survived, and they remembered. His stomach twisted violently as the truck passed another marker in the fog. This time, a small wooden stake with reflective tape wrapped around it. He barely registered it until his headlights illuminated the side of the trees just beyond, revealing another rusted wreck, smashed deep into the undergrowth. This one was older, more decayed, but the placement of the reflective tape near it caught his eye. Someone had been marking these spots. Someone had been tracking accidents along this detour for years, and one of them, the first one, was connected to him. He reached instinctively for his phone again, even though he knew there would be no service, and sure enough, the screen remained blank except for the mocking "no service" in the corner. Panic clawed up his throat. He wanted to scream, to slam the wheel, to wake himself from this nightmare, but the road ahead demanded focus. The fog thickened again, swirling like smoke, and for a moment the outside world became a blur of grey shapes and streaks of black trees. He blinked hard, trying to keep his eyes clear. Just then, the sedan blinked its headlights again. Slower this time, deliberate, almost gentle. Daniel shuddered. That wasn't a threat. That was acknowledgement. Recognition. A silent, "You saw it." Good. His chest tightened painfully. He wiped his sweaty palms against his jeans, breath coming in short, shallow bursts. His mind circled the same impossible thought. Who could it be? The face he remembered in the shattered side mirror had been blurred by rain, darkness, and his own fear. He had never seen them clearly, never checked their injuries, never confirmed if they lived. But now he knew. They lived, and they were behind him. As he rounded the next curve, the fog parted just enough to reveal another marker on the right side. Not a wrecked car this time, but something that made his stomach flip. A wooden post hammered into the ground with a piece of reflective metal wired to the top. And hanging from it, swaying gently in the breeze, was something he recognized instantly. A small blue air freshener shaped like a pine tree, the same kind he had hanging in his truck the night of the accident. The same kind that had been ripped from the mirror during the impact. He remembered seeing it fluttering on the pavement in his mirror as he drove away. Now it was here, waiting for him, preserved, displayed, a trophy or a reminder. Behind him, the sedan blinked its lights one more time, long, slow, deliberate. Daniel's breath broke into a ragged gasp, and he felt tears sting his eyes. Whoever was following him didn't want to just scare him. They wanted him to remember. They wanted him to feel everything he ran from. They wanted him to understand that this road, this night, this pursuit was not random. It was payback, and he had just entered its final stage. Daniel felt the air in the truck grow colder as he advanced deeper into the detour, every nerve in his body thrumming with the awareness that he was being led somewhere inevitable. The blue air freshener hanging from the wooden post behind him lingered in his mind, like a bruise he couldn't stop pressing. A symbol pulled straight from the wreckage of his past, shaken free and placed on display for only one set of eyes, his. He gripped the steering wheel with trembling hands, knuckles pale against the dark interior, and forced himself to breathe through the crushing realization that tonight wasn't an accident of timing. It was an appointment, one that had been waiting for years. Ahead, the road narrowed even further, the fog dragging its heavy blanket across the pavement until the world collapsed into a narrow tunnel illuminated only by his headlights. The trees grew thicker, leaning inward, their branches interlocking overhead like a canopy that swallowed any remaining trace of the sky. The forest didn't just feel silent now, it felt soundproof, as if any scream he made would dissolve before reaching the tree line. Behind him, the sedan followed with the same eerie serenity, gliding through the fog like a shadow stitched to his rear bumper. The driver never braked sharply, never accelerated suddenly, never drifted out of place. They obeyed the exact center of the lane with a precision that made Daniel's skin crawl. The only deviation came in the form of those deliberate headlight blinks, each one perfectly timed as if responding to some internal script only the pursuer understood. Daniel swallowed hard, his breath shaky as he passed another mile marker. The sign read, 3 miles to highway, but instead of bringing relief, the words deepened his dread. He could feel it in his bones. He wouldn't make it that far, not without something happening, not without a reckoning. His thoughts spiraled again toward the accident, clawing at the locked doors of his memory. He tried to stop it, to push the images back down, but they rose like a tide he couldn't control. He saw himself younger, exhausted, panicked, standing beside a steaming engine as rain plastered his hair to his forehead. He saw the other car, twisted, smoking, tipped against the guardrail. He saw a silhouette slumped inside, barely moving. And worst of all, he heard that faint, broken voice, a sound that had never fully left him, lingering like a ghost in the quiet moments of his life. He had run. He had justified it, and he had buried it. But guilt doesn't rot. It waits. Daniel blinked rapidly, trying to clear the tears forming at the corners of his eyes. He couldn't fall apart now. Not with miles still left, not with someone who clearly wanted him to remember every second of that night. As he rounded another curve, something new appeared on the right side of the road, something that made his blood run cold. A set of tire tracks, fresh ones. They cut sharply off the asphalt and into the forest mud, leaving deep grooves that disappeared into the undergrowth. Daniel's breath caught. Those tracks hadn't been there earlier. He would have noticed the detour didn't get heavy traffic this late at night, which meant someone had come through recently, maybe even minutes before he arrived. His palms grew slick with sweat. He wiped them on his jeans and returned his hands to the wheel, trying to steady his breathing. The sedan behind him remained steady, as if urging him on, guiding him down a path already chosen. The road dipped again, bringing him closer to the valley where the detour met the lowest point of the forest. Here, the fog pooled so thickly it looked like a white river flowing across the asphalt, swirling around the tires with every inch he moved forward. The headlights illuminated nothing beyond a few feet, and the isolation deepened even further. Then, just as he approached the next turn, his truck rolled over something that clattered beneath the tires with a faint metallic rattle. Daniel stiffened. He glanced into the mirror. The sedan passed over the same spot, producing the same faint sound. Something was lying in the road, not debris, not branches. Something placed there, and someone wanted him to know it. When he looked back ahead, heart pounding, he saw the road widen slightly in the distance. The first time in miles that it offered more than a tight corridor of fog. But the widening didn't comfort him. It terrified him. It meant space. Space for something to happen. Space for someone to pull over, space for a confrontation. His hands trembled as he approached it, the edges of the widened section emerging slowly from the fog. The forest opened up just enough to reveal a faint clearing on the right, a narrow dirt turnout barely large enough for one car. He recognized it instantly. He had been here before. Not recently, not in years, but he knew this place. It was the turnout he had sped past the night of the accident 32 miles away. Back then, it had been the only place he could have stopped safely, the only place he could have called for help, the only place he could have turned around. And he hadn't taken it. He had left it behind just as he left the person in the other car behind. And now, through the thick fog and the trembling reflection on his windshield, Daniel realized something he had been avoiding for miles. He was being guided back to the place where everything had begun. The same stretch of forest, the same narrowing detour, the same dim headlights in his mirror. This wasn't just pursuit. This was choreography. And whoever was behind him was leading him to the unspoken truth of the night he had tried so hard to erase. Ahead, the turnout waited like a mouth opening slowly in the fog, and Daniel understood with a violent jolt of panic that he had just reached the point of no return. Daniel wanted to drive past the turnout. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to keep going, to cling desperately to the hope that he might reach the main highway before anything irreversible happened. But the road itself seemed to resist him, narrowing again just beyond the clearing, bending sharply into a tight left curve that pulled his truck towards slower speeds, whether he wanted it or not. His fingers dug into the wheel, tendons standing out in his wrists, but deep down he knew the truth. There was no escaping this place. Not tonight, not from this person. The turnout ahead glowed faintly through the fog, illuminated only by his headlights and the sheen of damp dirt reflecting the beams. Behind him, the sedan maintained its position, calm, composed, unwavering, like a shadow tethered to his rear bumper. As he slowed for the curve, the gap between the two vehicles shrank ever so slightly, not enough to seem aggressive, but enough to make Daniel's pulse spike. The message was clear: you're slowing, so am I, and you are not leaving this road without facing me. For a sickening moment, Daniel considered flooring the gas, taking the curve too fast, risking whatever waited in the fog just to avoid the turnout. But another memory surged through him, the metallic screech, the spin, the shattered glass of that night years ago. And he knew he couldn't afford to repeat that mistake here, not on a road with no guardrail on the inner curve. If he pushed too fast, he wouldn't crash into someone else this time. He would crash alone. At the last second before the curve tightened, Daniel flicked his blinker on, not because he wanted to, but because some strange part of him felt compelled to mark the moment, to acknowledge the inevitability of what was about to happen. The soft ticking filled the cabin, sounding like a countdown. He guided the truck toward the turnout, his breathing shallow, his vision swimming for a moment under the weight of dread pressing into his chest. The sedan blinked its headlights again, long, slow, deliberate, and followed him. The dirt crunched beneath the truck's tires as he pulled into the narrow clearing. The ground felt uneven, the slope slight but noticeable. And when he finally came to a trembling stop near the edge of the clearing, he kept his hands on the wheel for several seconds, unable to make himself move. The engine idled softly, the only sound louder than the rapid pulse pounding in his ears. The fog curled around the edges of the truck like fingers closing in. He could barely see more than a few feet beyond the hood. He swallowed hard and forced himself to look in the mirror. The sedan rolled into the turnout behind him, its movements slow and controlled, the headlights illuminating the back of his truck in a pale, ghostly wash. It stopped 10 feet behind him, not close enough to trap him, not far enough to offer comfort. Perfectly placed, deliberate, calculated, meant to make sure he understood that every inch of this encounter had been orchestrated long before tonight. The headlights stayed on, silently burning through the fog. Daniel could see no silhouette in the driver's seat, no face leaning forward. The glare masked everything. For a moment he wondered if the person behind the wheel was even alive, or if the car itself was the instrument of fate coming to collect a debt. But the thought dissolved quickly. The logic of fear was never rational. The engine of the sedan hummed softly. Then, with a slow, almost mocking deliberation, it clicked off. The headlights died. Darkness swallowed the clearing. Daniel sucked in a sharp breath as the sudden absence of light made the world feel smaller, more intimate, more dangerous. The fog glowed faintly from the residual reflection of his own headlights, but beyond that, everything was swallowed in a heavy, suffocating gray. He couldn't see the sedan anymore. He couldn't see the driver. He couldn't hear footsteps. Just the faint tick, tick, tick of his cooling engine. His hands trembled violently. He forced himself to breathe, but every inhale felt shallow, jagged, as if the fog outside had seeped into his lungs. He reached for the door handle instinctively, the part of him desperate to flee, but his other hand froze it in place. Running wasn't an option. Not here. Not when he had no idea where the driver stood in the fog. He had to face this. Slowly, he turned off the truck's engine. The silence that followed was absolute. He sat there, the darkness pressing against the windows, his heartbeat echoing through the cabin. A faint crunch of gravel broke the quiet. One footstep, then another. Soft, slow. Approaching. Someone was moving through the fog, coming closer. Each step was deliberate, unhurried, filled with the kind of certainty that told Daniel they had waited years for this moment and would not rush it. He swallowed hard, eyes glued to the passenger side mirror, but the fog devoured everything. He saw no shape, no shadow, no movement, just gray. Another step, closer now, then another, and then silence. The kind of silence that sits on your chest and makes it hard to breathe. Daniel reached with trembling fingers toward the door lock, but a faint tap came from outside before he could touch it. A single knuckle-light tap on the window right beside his head. He froze. Slowly, painfully slowly, he turned his gaze to the left, and through the fog-blurred glass, just inches away, he saw the faint outline of a hand, not pounding, not scratching, just resting gently against the window, as if asking him to look. His breath broke into shallow gasps. Because the hand was scarred. Daniel stared at the scarred hand through the fogged-up glass, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to decide whether opening the door would save him or destroy him. The fingers rested against the window with a calmness that didn't match the storm raging in his chest. They didn't scrape, they didn't pound. They simply waited, as if offering him a choice he had avoided for too many years. The fog outside moved in slow waves, thinning and thickening in restless pulses, and it took several seconds before Daniel gathered enough courage to lean closer to the glass. His breath created a faint patch of condensation, blurring the view even more. He raised a trembling hand and wiped the inside of the window with his sleeve, clearing just enough to make out the faint shape of a figure standing on the other side, close, motionless, and unmistakably watching him. He couldn't see their face. The fog and darkness concealed everything above the shoulders, but he could see the outline of their body, the posture rigid but balanced, and the way the hand remained lifted at just the right height to catch his attention. The scar that crossed the back of it was unmistakable, a long, jagged line that ran from the knuckles to the wrist, the kind of scar left by torn metal or shattered glass. The kind of scar someone would get in a car crash. A car crash that had happened because of him. A tremor rolled through his chest. He swallowed hard, feeling the sharp sting of tears he refused to let fall. He had known the moment he saw the wreck on the side of the detour that tonight wasn't random, but seeing that scar made everything collapse into certainty. The person he left behind had survived. They had healed, and they had come back for the truth he'd run from. Slowly, the hand lifted away from the glass. Daniel's pulse hammered. He didn't know what to do next. If he stayed inside the truck, he felt exposed. If he stepped outside, he felt even more exposed. But one truth cut through all the panic clouding his mind. This confrontation was no longer avoidable. It hadn't been for miles. With a shaky inhale, he unlocked the door. The click echoed unnaturally loud in the suffocating fog. For a moment, nothing happened. The hand didn't return. No voice spoke. No footsteps moved. The silence was so heavy, it pressed into his ribs. Gathering every ounce of strength he had left, Daniel pushed the door open. The fog rushed in immediately, cold and wet, dragging the smell of earth and pine into the cabin. He stepped out onto the uneven dirt, his legs trembling so violently he nearly stumbled. The truck's headlights cast a faint glow into the clearing, but it wasn't enough to penetrate the dense grey curtains surrounding him. "Hello?" he whispered, barely recognizing his own voice. The word faded into the fog as though it had been swallowed whole. Then a shape appeared just a few feet away, tall, motionless, standing at the edge of the headlight's reach. The figure didn't advance, didn't retreat. They simply stood there watching him, the fog drifting around their silhouette like a living thing. Daniel's breath faltered. He took a small step forward, his boots sinking slightly into the damp dirt. The figure shifted, just enough for the faint light to catch the outline of their shoulder and the glint of something on their wrist, a metal brace, old and worn, the kind used after severe injuries. His stomach twisted painfully. Why are you following me?" he managed to ask, though he already knew the answer. The figure took one step forward, not threatening, not rushed, just a step, enough to let Daniel see more of them, enough to let the fog peel away from their features. And then he saw the face, older now, hardened, eyes sunken slightly, the left brow marked by a thin white scar, but the expression wasn't rage. It wasn't hatred. It was something worse. Disappointment, pain, resolve. Daniel felt everything inside him crack. He tried to speak, but his throat closed around the words. The person stood only 6 feet away now, close enough that Daniel could see the faint tremble in their injured hand. Close enough that the reflection of the truck's headlights glinted off the metal brace at their wrist. And then, for the first time, the person spoke. "You left me," they said, their voice quiet, steady, carrying years of weight in 3 simple words. Daniel's knees weakened. His breath broke in a ragged gasp. I know," he whispered. "I panicked. I was scared. I didn't know what to do." The figure shook their head slowly, not in accusation, not even in anger, in acknowledgement. "I waited," they said. "I waited for someone to come back, for help, for anything." Their voice cracked slightly. No one came. Daniel felt tears burning down his cheeks. The cold night air made them sting. "I'm sorry," he whispered, because the weight of anything more meaningful crushed his voice before it formed. "I should have stayed. I should have helped you. I carried this for years, I swear." The figure took another small step forward, closing the distance to only a few feet. "Carrying it wasn't enough," they said. "You had a choice. I didn't." Daniel lowered his head, unable to hold their gaze anymore. His entire body felt hollow, as though guilt had carved him out from the inside. For a long moment, the figure said nothing. The fog drifted between them, weaving through the tension like a silent witness. Finally, the person took a slow breath. "I didn't come to kill you," they said quietly. "If I wanted to, I had miles to do it." Daniel looked up, shocked. The figure continued. "I came because I needed you to know what you did. I needed you to see what it turned me into. And I needed to see if you cared, if you remembered." Their voice softened, though the pain remained. "Now I know." Daniel stepped forward instinctively, his eyes flooded with regret. "Tell me what you want me to do," he said. "Anything. Just tell me." The figure watched him for a long, silent moment. Then they exhaled a breath that seemed to release years of weight. "Live with it," they said simply. "Really live with it. Don't bury it again." They turned slightly, glancing toward the sedan, now barely visible through the fog. "And don't ever drive away from someone again." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "I won't," he whispered. "I swear it." The figure nodded once, a small, tired gesture, and began walking toward their car, their steps slow but steady. Daniel didn't follow, couldn't. He watched silently as the fog swallowed them whole. The sedan's engine started, its headlights flickered on, and without another signal, without another blink, it backed out of the turnout and disappeared into the misty dark, leaving Daniel standing alone in the clearing, with nothing but his guilt, the cold, and the quiet echo of the reckoning he had finally faced. And for the first time in years, he didn't run.